Hello and welcome. My name is Ameepolis, they, he, she, and today's pick is Call Me Bill by Lynette Richards with an introduction by Emily Burton Rocha. This relatively short YA graphic novel was published in 2022 by Anonymity in the lead up to the 150th anniversary of the crash of the SS Atlantic. I initially picked this volume up 2 years ago and have been meaning to review it ever since. Well, new year, new me, lol. And I have checked it out of the library again to refresh my memory. This being my second review of 2025 to involve sailors, link in the cards for my review of Under the Banner of King Death, I'm left wondering what other nautical comics I can pick up to make it my theme of 2025. Leave recommendations in the comments if you have any, content notes for mass casualties using queer in a negative way, and cursive. Keywords that came to mind: disaster, rescue, globetrotting, gender, and sailors. The publisher's summary was, quote, a gorgeously illustrated historical graphic novel based on a real person who, defying gender expectations, left home in search of adventure and a more authentic life. It was April 1st, 1873. In the middle of the night, Sarah Jane spotted flares off the coast of her island home. She woke her father, who quickly gathered their neighbors. Over the next several hours, rescuers pulled 429 traumatized survivors out of the wreckage of the SS Atlantic, a White Star Liner passenger steamship, but 535 people didn't survive, including Bill, a sailor. However, this story isn't about death. It's about living. Swapping out their dress for a pair of pants, Bill had run away from New Jersey in search of adventure, anonymity, and a place in the world. When they were hired to work on a cargo steamer, everything seemed to fall into place. But it didn't take long for Bill to realize they were really just searching for a place where they could be themselves. Over 4 years of heavy research, debut graphic novelist Lynette Richards gathered details of this story from a range of historic newspapers from all over the world. By taking a creative nonfiction approach to storytelling, Richards was able to speak to the courage that readers will recognize as necessary for self-discovery. In Call Me Bill, Richards shares a remarkable life story of a tenacious adventurer who took huge risks to live an authentic life that others would have had difficulty imagining. Set against the backdrop of the worst maritime disaster before the Titanic, this story is an exploration of identity and radical imagination that echoes across generations. End quote. Looking at the creative behind the page and other contributors, as the summary points out, this is Richards' debut work, although she brings to it 30 years of experience working professionally with stained glass. Flipping to their bio in the back of the book, quote, Richards has been cartooning her whole life. She chose stained glass as her professional medium because it was both a trade and an art. She was fully aware, too, that stained glass windows have used sequential narration for over 1,000 years and are essentially early graphic novels, end quote. In an interview with Richards on Global News Morning Halifax, Richards explained how the research she conducted after joining the board of the museum commemorating this disaster in Terrence Bay and her own experience as a lesbian woman coming up in a male-dominated field led her to write this particular story. Looking at her profile working at the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21, Emily is described as an oral historian with a doctorate from Dalhousie University in Canadian history. Moving along to the writing section of this review, it definitely reads as younger YA. The coming of age aspect feels more aspirational than nostalgic, as it were, and there is a certain simplicity to it all. Drawbacks for me as a millennial, but not necessarily a critique in context. Given this target demographic, though, the page of not terribly clear and cramped cursive writing is a real drawback. Art-wise, an interesting spectrum of gray tones and energetic lines. Page layouts were a bit oversized, but also nicely varied. Looking at gender in historic context can be a touchy subject, even if you completely ignore all the really silly people who claim that any sort of gender diversity beyond the current cultural constructs never existed before now. There's plenty of evidence to the contrary, but whatever, they refuse to be convinced. That said, how people have understood gender and sexuality has morphed and changed steadily through space and time. So while there have always been people existing outside of the rigid binaries people are currently looking to uphold, it can be hard to discuss them, and it is often hard to guess exactly how these individuals would or would not relate to the current discourse. Overall, I would say I felt like Call Me Bill balances things fairly adeptly. On the one hand, the foundation for the story is historic fact, and on the other, brave imagination, with a powerful integration of primary documents, daring to say in the face of rising transphobia, what if, and telling a real page-turner in the process. Looking at race and class, there is a dash of light intersectional analysis that pops up throughout. That said, I would have liked to see the character of Cicely and her husband a bit more developed. As it stands, Cicely in particular felt a bit like a cardboard cutout of a freed black woman/housekeeper that just served to push our protagonist out into his adventures. Call Me Bill also felt fairly grounded. Bill does a lot of traveling, so it's not like we set down roots anywhere, but at the same time, every event happens in a defined space and time and isn't just floating in an unnamed, character-centric space. Class wasn't directly discussed, but the story was pretty well steeped in working class reality. Similarly, sexuality was a passing mention, as our protagonist is not really interested in that sort of thing, but they do run into at least one working class queer community in their travels. I seem to recall some nods to the reality of being less than perfectly able-bodied, but I don't remember exactly. Wrapping things up, I think I've said everything I wanted to. I feel a bit silly with how long it took me to finally do this review, but it is easier to consume than to consume, reflect, chew for a bit, maybe research some more, and then regurgitate an opinion, edit, etc. As far as rating goes, I would say it was different and interesting, so 4 stars. Bye y'all, keep reading, and remember that all colonial settler states are a lie. And Literally Graphic is created on land that should be given back to the traditional landholders, which in this case is, to my knowledge, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, an Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation.